Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. As preppers, we have a tendency to focus on what we don't have. That could be different kinds of survival gear, food, fuel, or any number of things. And while it's good to constantly improve our preps, many of us, myself included, can do a much better job maintaining what we've already got. Because there's no purpose in spending a bunch of money on things and just letting them degrade. So today we're going to talk about preps we should keep an eye on to make sure that they're ready when we need them. And one really important thing to keep up with is survival kits. While we're supposed to set these up and set them aside for a rainy day, things rarely work out that way. Get home bags, for example, just by their nature are used daily, and many times things get taken out of them. This can also happen with other things like bug out bags and vehicle survival kits. So go through your kits and make sure that you haven't taken something out and forgot to put it back in. That can include knives, flashlights, or any other kind of gear that you may need to use occasionally. But also don't forget to replenish your consumables. I know that when it comes to my get home bag, I need to replace some of the medications that I normally keep in there. We all get things like headaches or eat something that doesn't agree with us. I'm looking at you, Whataburger. But over the past few months, I've used some of my pain relievers and Pepto, and I just need to go ahead and put some more in there. Another thing that preppers should check on is their emergency food storage. While some types of long-term storage foods are designed to be set aside for decades, others require a little more attention. Then it's also important to remember that outside factors like storage conditions and pests can cause even the best foods to degrade or become unsafe to eat. If you store canned goods, then be sure to use a first in, first out rotation and storage method, and can rotators like this one make that much easier to do. Even though canned goods are technically safe to eat indefinitely, they will experience changes in taste, color, and texture as time goes on. But if you're always eating your oldest stores first, then nothing should sit long enough for that to become an issue. And while you shouldn't store too many foods like this, if you have things with shorter shelf lives, ranging from around 6 months to a year, then definitely keep track of those and rotate through them. If you have any meat in your freezer, then be sure to keep that freezer full so that it'll stay cooler longer if you experience a power outage. Ice blocks like these can be used to fill any dead airspace. Then, if you have a backup power source, your freezer should be given priority over other devices so that you stand a better chance of preserving that food. If you have food stored in Mylar bags, then be sure to inspect those occasionally as well. Even though those are designed specifically for long-term storage, they can still experience issues. One example of this that I've experienced is with 5-gallon bucket liners. When using these, you have to stuff the excess material into the bucket, and that can weaken the plastic in some locations, which could potentially cause a puncture. I actually had that happen with a bag of rice. At one point, it looked shrink wrapped due to how many oxygen absorbers I had put in it, but one day I looked inside of the bucket and that bag was no longer airtight. The seal on the bag was done correctly, so the only thing I can think of that would have caused this is a small pinhole puncture in the body of the bag itself. This can also happen if you're trying to store pokier foods like certain types of dry pasta. Spaghetti hasn't given me any trouble, but I did need to double bag some penne noodles. Then you should also keep an eye out for any signs of pests. Mice and rats are the biggest threats since they can actually chew through Mylar bags and plastic buckets. So don't store any of your food where they can have easy, unnoticed access to it. And keep an eye out for any signs of rodent or insect activity in your home or anywhere else that you store food. The old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, is definitely true when it comes to this. But if they do crop up, you want to be able to take care of them very quickly because they all reproduce pretty darn fast. Also, keep an eye on your food to make sure that it hasn't been spoiled by botulism. Botulism is caused by an extremely dangerous bacteria and can be found in improperly stored or damaged canned goods, home canned foods, and certain dry goods like cornmeal, although it can affect other things as well. So keep an eye out for bulging cans and puffy looking bags, along with any container that makes a loud hissing sound when being opened. And when it comes to where you store your food, keep it in a dry location where you can control the temperature and humidity. Heat and temperature fluctuations can cause food to degrade faster, and high humidity will cause cans to rust. If you keep any food items and things like vehicle kits, be sure to swap those out regularly to prevent them from going bad due to temperature variations that are common in that sort of environment. And then the same goes for medications and batteries as well. Those don't hold up well either. When it comes to water, make sure that none of your containers are leaking and wash out and refill any portable containers every so often to prevent algae from building up inside of them. This is less likely with totally opaque containers like the military water can, since they don't let light in, but it's still a good idea to go ahead and do this with all of your containers. Another prep you should keep an eye on are fuel-based generators, and the best way to do this is to start them regularly. This will let you know if there's any issues with your equipment before you actually need it. This is important to do with any generator, but it's even more so if you have an electric start feature. Those rely on a battery to work, and many of them use traditional lead-acid batteries, which self-discharge very quickly. I even had mine on a maintainer, but when I tried to use it, it didn't work. To make matters worse, you cannot start my particular generator on gas without the electric start feature. In addition to having that electric start, it's also dual fuel, and there's a solenoid which controls the switch between the two fuel types. It defaults to propane, and without electricity, it will not switch from propane to gas, meaning it'll only work on propane. Thankfully, it wasn't an emergency when it happened, and I mainly store propane for that generator anyway. Also, avoid keeping old fuel in your generator for too long. This is especially problematic if it stays in the carburetor, since carbs tend to get gummed up. An easy way around this is to shut off the fuel line and just let the generator run out of gas to turn itself off. You don't need to do this every time you shut your generator down, but it's a good idea if it's going to be stored for any length of time, since doing that will remove gas from the carburetor and fuel lines past that shutoff point. When possible, also try to use ethanol-free gas. It'll store much longer than ethanol-based fuel, since it doesn't bond as easily with moisture in the air. And it's also much easier on small engines, since it's less likely to gum things up or corrode gaskets and seals. However, regardless of the fuel that you're using, it's still a good idea to rotate through it. Then also be sure to keep up with regular maintenance like oil changes and making sure that your air filter is clean. It also wouldn't hurt to have a couple of spark plugs set aside along with a spark plug socket to change those out. Another thing that a lot of preppers forget to take care of are their batteries. We all know that traditional alkaline batteries can corrode when they sit in storage or in a device for too long, but other battery types, and even lithium-ion batteries and solar generators, need to be stored properly as well. Lithium-ion batteries should be used at least once a year, but should be put into storage at around 50 or 60% capacity. Practically speaking, the best way to maintain your batteries is to just use them regularly. And I know that this can be a challenge with devices that you want to keep in reserves or protect in something like a Faraday cage. That's actually a big mistake that I've made with some of my solar generators. I wanted to keep those and my power tool batteries ready at all times, and by doing so, I kept them at too high of a charge level, which ended up reducing both their overall capacity and their lifespan. For smaller rechargeable batteries like AA's, AAA's, and D cells, a battery organizer like the Battery Daddy can be used to keep all of them in one place and help you rotate them to make sure that they're all getting use. It's big enough that you can keep your rechargeable batteries separate from your alkalines, and then even comes with a small compartment for button cells. Then environmental conditions like temperature and humidity can cause batteries to degrade as well. Because of this, you want to avoid storing batteries in places like your garage or attic. Interior closets away from exterior walls are probably going to be your best bet. Another thing that can cause batteries to get too hot is fast charging them. Doing that every once in a while probably isn't going to hurt them too much, but I wouldn't do it all the time. That's another mistake that I made with my drill batteries. I used the fast charger way too much, which caused them to degrade even faster. For my solar generators, I've gone ahead and turned down the charging speed on them to help reduce the strain on the batteries and increase their lifespan. Then for smaller electronics like flashlights and radios, avoid storing them with batteries inside. That's especially true if you're using alkaline batteries, which corrode easily, but you should remove other battery types as well, even if it's just to prevent them from draining faster. But if you're like me and you have certain devices that you prefer to keep batteries in, be sure to check them regularly to A, make sure they still work, and B, make sure that the batteries inside of them haven't corroded. Another solution is to keep batteries in small boxes like this while they're in your different kits so that those batteries are near the devices they'll be stored with but not stored inside of them. This is one from my Get Home bag, and it gives me an extra set of batteries for the flashlight and headlamp that I keep in there. You can get a set of 10 kind of like this for around 10 bucks online. Then we should also keep an eye on other kinds of gear as well, including tools. When it comes to your knives, make sure that all of them are clean and have a sharp edge. When I was filming last week's video, I noticed that the edge on my BK7 could use some work. I guess I used it and then forgot to touch it up. But when it comes to sharpening, I use the Spyderco Sharp Maker, and it does an excellent job. It'll get most knives razor sharp in around 5 or 10 minutes, and it's pretty easy to use. For most knives, if you can hold them straight up and down and pass them over the stone, it'll sharpen them. There are other sharpeners out there that may do a better job, but they're going to be much more expensive and they aren't as portable as that is. Then also keep an eye on other kinds of gear to make sure they're in good shape. Bags and clothing can start to come apart at seams or may just experience excessive wear in certain locations. Being able to repair your gear or knowing when to replace it could prevent you from depending on something faulty when you need it most. Then don't forget maintenance on your pew-pews and on your boomsticks. If you carry your pew-pew regularly, then you may want to make sure that there isn't a dust bunny the size of a real bunny that's squatting inside of the barrel. So make sure that those are oiled, bores are clear on them, and that there isn't any corrosion. Because if you carry on body, keep in mind that sweat is corrosive. So you want to find the line between protecting that metal but not oiling it so much that a bunch of crud sticks to it. Then, even more important than maintaining your gear is to maintain yourself. Physical health is probably the first thing that comes to mind for most people, and I'll admit that this is one area I can still do better in. I recently had to move a bunch of stuff, and it wore me out a lot faster and a lot worse than I thought it would. But also don't forget to maintain your skills. There's a lot of things like knot tying, carving, and shooting that can start to degrade over time, so be sure that you're doing what you can to keep those skills sharp. And one really important skill to have during an emergency is being resourceful. So if you want to see 15 items that you can repurpose for survival if you lose access to your primary survival gear, then click here. Or if you want to learn more about organizing your prep so that they're there when you need them, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.